Yep. I hope you can see my screen. Victor, do you see my screen already?
Yes, yeah, it's good
Great.
to go.
Great. So again, a warm welcome from my side. This is Gaurav, and I would be hosting your Garage September session for today. And I have with me my colleagues joining in from the Strategic Customer Engagements team. And today, the use case that we would be talking about is how businesses can integrate their SAP S4HANA systems with Microsoft Teams via SAP Business Technology Platform. So that is the session, or that is the use case that we would be discussing for today. But before that, I would like to also, give you slight brief, like why we started the garage for the participants who are joining us for the first time, and what is the motivation behind us to, start this garage. So the whole idea was to, give you hands-on experience, give you a real-time scenario of how implementing a use case on a customer's landscape would look like. What are those steps typically the developers, typically the architects, the solution architects would take to implement such a scenario in their own landscape. So that is the vision by which we started the garage. And we are very proud to have such a nice audience who makes this garage a huge success, which also motivates us to bring these industry use cases over the month to you and showcase how these scenarios where integrating an S4HANA system to your Microsoft Teams or to other solutions becomes a very concrete use case, and showcase how it can be done via the steps performed by the experts. So that is the whole idea also behind Garage, to have the experts behind these sessions who would also showcase how implementing these use case would look like. So this is the today's mission that we just now talked about, where we would be seeing how we can extend S4HANA business processes with the help of BTP, and leveraging or performing those operations that typically businesses would do by going into these systems. But by building these extensions, they can easily do it in this scenario via Microsoft Teams. So that is the whole idea for today's use case. And today we have with me my colleagues Victor and Vaikun, who would be, showcasing this use case, presenting you the demo. But also I have you with me, who, as I said, already makes our garage a huge success. So a great, heartiest thanks from all of us to, make this garage a huge success. We can only motivate you to share these sessions with your colleagues, your peers, so that, more and more colleagues are enabled on implementing such use cases. With that, I would hand it over to Victor and Vaikun to, showcase the use case that we just now talked, and show you the steps needed to implement this scenario. Like Victor,
All right.
Vaikun, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gaurav. And so I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. So like was mentioned earlier, today the topic that we'll be talking about is integrating SAP S4HANA with Microsoft Teams via SAP Business Technology Platform. To get some quick introductions out of the way, I know they were done briefly already, but I'm Victor, and today I'm joined by my colleague Wei-kun. Wei-kun, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you so much, Victor. Hi guys, good afternoon. My name is Wei Kun. I'm a developer from the SAP TIIC team. It's my pleasure to meet you guys during this meeting.
Yeah, so then just to give you a little bit of background about our team before we get started. So our team, the Strategic Customer Engagements team, focuses on working with customers to develop innovations primarily around the BTP portfolio. So this is really just an example of that, where we're trying to integrate S4HANA with Microsoft Teams. So let's take a look at how that's achieved and what we're really talking about here. So the agenda for today is that I'll give you an introduction to Teams integrations in the first place. I'll tell you why you should care about Teams integrations. We'll talk about a business scenario that's relevant to Teams integrations, and then we'll give you a walkthrough of the Discovery Center mission. And at the end, I'll show you a demo video of an example application that can be achieved using Bridge Framework. Okay, so Teams integrations, why do we care? Well, the tools we use for work have changed very drastically. Post-pandemic communication platforms, digital communication platforms in particular, are more important than ever. And we see that a lot of people are spending more time in meetings than ever before. And most of those meetings are being carried out on digital communication platforms. So although we're having this meeting in Zoom right now, I would say that most of my meetings happen in Teams, and we know that a lot of enterprises are using Teams extensively. And we can get a really good estimate of that just based on the daily active users that Teams has acquired over the years. So they've gone from 2020, pre-pandemic, with 32 million users to somewhere in the neighborhood of 280 million users around today. So that is a crazy meteoric rise. And it really underscores the value of integrating with such platforms. So here we're looking at an integration solution that's centered around SAP BTP. Why is it centered around SAP BTP? Well, because we want to provide access to the services that BTP provides for integration, and we also want to use those services because they provide some best practices and really the most straightforward and secure way to integrate with SAP platforms. But ultimately, what do we actually want? Well, we want to fit customer needs and leverage BTP because of the reasons that I just described. And the reason we want to do this is because Teams integration is simply a highly requested feature for good reason, and integration is more important than ever. So what are the outcomes that we actually want to see from a Teams integration solution? Well, one outcome is increasing productivity. We know that context switching, going from one app to another, having to switch between a bunch of tabs or different applications, different modes of interaction, different UX experiences, this can actually decrease productivity. So by enabling people to make, to take simple decisions within, say, Teams, we're really saving them some time, especially for those users that aren't power users of, an SAP product and aren't doing anything complicated. We're really looking at these kind of high traffic, one-click use cases. So that's one thing. Now, we also want to take advantage of the collaborative features that these platforms provide, so enhancing that collaboration. So when we're discussing a business object that might be up for approval, we want to discuss it in the communication platform that we would normally use, which would be Teams. And since we're already discussing it there, we want to bring SAP data to Teams and make it a little bit easier to interact with in kind of the native communication environment. So that enhances collaboration. Then we want to actually get some benefit from Teams back into SAP. So we want to be able to leverage Teams data. So, a meeting like this is being recorded. Well, there might be a chat transcript or an actual meeting transcript that's generated as a result of that. And we want to be able to harness some of the information, especially as we have generative AI entering into the fold, to take insights from that data and actually do something useful with it in SAP. So with such an integration solution, that's something that's accessible to us. And lastly, we want to increase visibility. So with increasing visibility, we're really looking at gaining more transparency into processes. So we're able to enable proactive issue resolution faster because we're all on the same page, and we're able to take a look at communication exactly where it's happening instead of having to port it from one place to another. All right, now let's go to the next slide. Here, we'll start talking about a business scenario that's relevant to this mission. I think it'll become a little bit more clear once we actually introduce the mission, but the business scenario is streamlining approval workflows for SAP S4HANA. So what does this business scenario entail, and what does this use case essentially boil down to? Well, we want to provide users with the ability to approve, reject, or discuss purchase orders directly in Teams. So again, we want to get rid of that context switching for simple actions like reviewing a purchase order and simply enable business users to take those actions in Teams. Now, some of the challenges, I already mentioned them, but essentially productivity is lost to context switching and ineffective collaboration. We might be talking about a particular purchase order, but maybe that's not clear to every single party, and you might be pasting in IDs and doing all sorts of things that really are kind of counterproductive to staying on the same page. So we want to bring that purchase order into Teams and simply allow people to take action right there. So what is the outcome? Well, it centralizes that approval workflow into Teams. It makes it easier to have high velocity collaboration. So you don't really have to think about a slower or a lower velocity medium like email, for example, here in Teams, you can instantly collaborate with people, ask them questions about a business document, and even take action like approve or reject. And then lastly, again, that point with two-way data flow. So here, SAP systems will benefit from access to communication platforms and vice versa. So that brings us to our mission. So again, the mission is the same as the title of this presentation, which is integrate SAP S4HANA with Microsoft Teams via SAP Business Technology Platform. This mission is related to an open source framework that we call Bridge Framework. So Bridge Framework really makes it easy to develop custom integration applications, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in the following slides. Now, for this mission, we kind of estimate a duration of 2 to 4 days, since there are a fair amount of configuration steps involved and a fair amount of systems to set up. But the prerequisites are essentially familiarity with S4HANA, with BTP, and with Microsoft Azure. Although if you don't have a lot of familiarity with either of those systems or any of the systems, you might be able to learn some of it along the way, and the mission really helps you achieve that. Okay. So the way that we'll present this walkthrough here in this Garage series is that we'll primarily replicate the view that you'll see in the project board for the mission. So in the top left corner, you can see that mission story. So here we're looking at the project board, and this is the first card from the project board. Again, the mission story. So we'll basically go through each card, provide you with some tips and hints about how to work with it. And the reason we're doing this is because, like I said, there's a fair amount of configuration involved. So really the best way to follow this will be through the mission, but here you'll get some tips and hints and everything to just kind of piece it all together in your head so that you understand what the desired outcome is. So with that being said, let's take a look at the goal. So the goal, again, is to integrate S4HANA with Microsoft Teams by building a custom Teams app using the Bridge Framework deployed on SAP BTP. And the outcome will be such a custom Teams integration app. So this app will be able to view SAP data and even take actions on that data directly from Microsoft Teams. And the business scenario that we're working with, again, is that purchase order approval workflow. So if we kind of look at that process diagram or sort of workflow diagram on the right, you can see that there's a couple of steps, starting with the buyer who creates a purchase order via SAP GUI or Fiori. That results in a Teams notification being sent to a purchase manager for PO approval. And then that purchase manager is able to check the details of the PO, and they're also able to discuss it with the buyer or take action on it directly. Then that last step 5 is the purchase manager is able to check all of his or her pending tasks. This will make a little bit more sense when we see the demo. So let's take a look at the system architecture as well. So this is kind of the broad architecture for the solution that Bridge Framework achieves. And it really has 3 main components. So on the right, we have S4HANA, in the middle, we have BTP, and on the left, we have Azure. So taking a look at S4HANA first, here in this mission, we'll be working with an on-premise S4HANA system, but this is obviously achievable with a cloud system as well. And Bridge Framework also enables you to interact with other systems like C4C and SuccessFactors. So what will we need from that S4HANA system? Well, we'll need a communication arrangement to fetch purchase orders and actually enable us to take action on those purchase orders. And then we'll also need an ABAP job to eventually interface with Event Mesh and be able to deliver notifications to a message queue. And then on the BTP side of things, this is where we'll have access to the communication services that we need to connect S4HANA with Microsoft Teams. We'll have event handling services like Event Mesh and an application runtime where we'll be hosting our custom app. So in Teams, although you're developing a Teams app, that app will not actually be hosted on Teams. In our case, it'll actually be hosted on BTP. And then lastly, on the left, we have Azure. So this is essentially where you're able to interact with Teams. So Microsoft Teams and Azure, the Azure resources and services that you'll need. We'll talk about those later, but essentially you can simply think of it as you need Azure in order to interface with Teams. So I mentioned Bridge Framework a little bit earlier, but what is it? So here we'll learn the basics of Bridge Framework deployed on SAP BTP. So essentially what it is it's an integration framework on SAP BTP that accelerates and simplifies the development experience for custom or extension apps on communication platforms, such as Microsoft Teams, that integrate with SAP products. What are the advantages of using Bridge Framework? Well, you're leveraging SAP BTP, so you're able to use services that are secure and follow best practices. And then you're also able to readily deploy your custom applications with simple configurations. Again, we'll talk about those a little bit later. Like I mentioned earlier, using BTP services enables you to have secure communications, secure connections, essentially. And lastly, we have some curated UI components that'll make it easier to build an interface that meets your requirements. Oh, and before I forget, that automated setup, this is very important. It'll come up later, but automated setup means that basically enabling all of these services and resources to spin up both on the Azure side and on the BTP side will be greatly accelerated through that automation pipeline. So looking at the next couple of cards in the project board, we want to learn about the basics of BTP and the basics of S4HANA. So general familiarity here with BTP will help you. If you're familiar with using the BTP cockpit, you understand what sub-accounts are, entitlements, services, subscriptions, etc. If that diagram on the right showing you the connection between BTP sub-accounts and global accounts, if you've seen this diagram before and are kind of familiar with the content here, the BTP section will be a little bit easier for you, as you'll understand what configurations you need to make to fit your particular requirement. And it'll also make it a little bit easier to follow the directions within this mission. Lastly, that basic familiarity with S4HANA will also come in handy. So here you'll want a basic understanding of ABAP development and OData APIs, but you'll be able to pick it up along the way if you're not super familiar with those concepts. Okay, so on to the next set of cards. Here we're looking at event mesh, connectivity service, integration suite, and event-driven architectures. So event mesh, again, will be that interface for having a message queue that will essentially drive those notifications into Teams. Then connectivity service will essentially be used to connect and form a proxy with Cloud Connector and ultimately form that secure connection with your target system, which in this case will be S4HANA on-premise. And then integration suite, we will not use it in this mission, but in case you are interested in using integration suite instead of destination service, it is also a possibility. So we simply include it here so you can take a closer look at using it if it meets your requirements and is something that you need. And then event-driven architectures. So this diagram on the right shows you basically the basics of an event-driven architecture, talking about event sources. So in our case, say SAP S4HANA on-premise, our eventing infrastructure that we use is event mesh under integration suite. And then we have some event consumers here, BTP services, potentially, something like a Cloud Foundry runtime with an app deployed on it would fit that bill. Okay, so on to the next section for cards. Here we'll be preparing. So what we want to prepare is those three systems that we talked about. So S4HANA, Teams, and then BTP as well. For SAP employees, if you have access to SAP Cloud Appliance Library, you'll be able to spin up a trial or sandbox or POC type of instance pretty quickly. But otherwise, you would have to already have existing access to S4HANA on-premise in order to do your testing. Then the next thing that we'll need is a sub-account for SAP BTP. So here, we want to note that trial accounts as of today do not have access to event mesh. So if you want to deliver notifications, which in many use cases you would, you will have to use a fully featured account, not a trial account. However, you can still follow along with a trial account and achieve most of the functionality in this mission. In your BTP sub-account, you'll want to have access to the following services and resources, but I have some information on the next slides that's a little bit more detailed, so we'll go to that. So what do we want in our BTP sub-account? Well, we want access to a Cloud Foundry runtime. So again, this is where our application will actually be deployed. So there are kind of three components to the application. There will be a client, a server, and a configuration server. So this runtime, this Cloud Foundry runtime will basically be the hosting environment for those to run. Then we'll be using SAP Connectivity Service in conjunction with Cloud Connector to basically form the layer that creates a secure tunnel between SAP S4HANA and SAP BTP. Following, we'll have Cloud Identity Services and Identity Authentication. This will enable us to manage our users and access to applications. It'll also enable principal propagation, which you can kind of think of as similar to SSO, to occur between teams and SAP S4HANA by mediating it on BTP. Then for the actual communications itself, we use destination service. So here we're defining and managing our connections to external, in this case, actually SAP applications. So we're using destination service to connect to S4HANA. So here we'll configure those relevant OData APIs for accessing purchase orders from S4HANA, with obviously a communication arrangement created on the S4HANA side. Lastly, we have Event Mesh. So this will allow your application to communicate through events, and it'll basically provide an ability to listen for purchase order creations in S4HANA and propagate those events to our custom Teams app. Okay, so this next component here is Microsoft Azure. Again, we'll want to prepare with an Azure account. And if you don't already have an account, an Azure free account will give you access to the services and resources you need to get started with Bridge Framework. But to test in Microsoft Teams, you might also want a development tenant. So you can get access to a development tenant, which we have used to basically develop Bridge Framework. So you can get access to something similar through the Microsoft 365 developer program. Now, what do you actually need in Azure itself? Well, this is a detailed breakdown of all the services and resources that you'll need here. So at a fundamental level, you need an application registration. So this will be the app level foundation, basically for your custom app to be able to define authentication, authorization, and API access. And then the next component will be the enterprise application registration, which essentially serves to enable principal propagation. So almost SSO to SAP BTP. Lastly, Azure Active Directory. This is the foundational place where you are managing your identity and access, SSO, application integration, etc. So this is where you'll keep track of your users essentially. Moving on, we have Azure Bot Service. So this is where almost all of your interactions between custom apps and teams happen. So this extension app that we're talking about creating, this will interact with Azure Bot Service. So this is what enables us to send messages and adaptive cards. It's what acts based on app logic and user interactions. So whenever you're opening an app or submitting anything within the app, this is essentially what will handle it. Next, Microsoft Graph. This covers any app interactions that are not handled by the bot service. So that includes things like notifications, accessing user profiles, fetching meeting transcripts, etc. Then lastly, we have Azure Blob Storage. So essentially, we just use this as a place to store conversation references and some metadata, and this enables proper notifications to be delivered. All right, so with all that, I'll hand it back to Wei Kun for a use case and system architecture review.
Thank you, Victor. So, hello guys. So before we head into the detailed information about setup and the deployment inside of this mission, let's take a quick review for the use cases we used in this mission. So the use case we choose is enable purchase order approval in the Microsoft Teams app via the Bridge Framework. The business user or the purchase order creator will create a purchase order in the SAP S4HANA system. Once the purchase order created, the purchase order approver will receive a notification card in their Microsoft Teams account. The purchase order approver could view the details information about the newly created purchase order, forward notification card to the creator in the Microsoft Teams to have a live discussion, and also approve or reject the purchase order. So let's also take a quick overview about the system architecture behind the things. So like my colleague Victor said, there's a custom ABAP job running in the SAP S4HANA system in order to send in the purchase order data, and also the workflow data to the message queue hosting in the SAP Event Mesh service on the SAP BTP platform. The Bridge Framework backend service will consume the message from the message queue, reading the purchase order approval's informations, finding the purchase order approval inside of the Microsoft Teams via the Microsoft Graph service, and then sending the notification card to the approver in the Teams. The purchase order approver could see the details information about the purchase order and perform the approval actions based on their decision. This is because the single sign-on between the SAP S4HANA and the Microsoft Teams has been enabled. Once the user make a request, for example, view the purchase order data or to perform the action by clicking the approve or reject button, we will exchange the user's Microsoft Teams access token to the SAP BTP access token through the on behalf flow via the Access UA service and also the Azure AD. And then by doing so, we could enable the purchase order approver view the data fetching from the S4HANA system directly inside of the Microsoft Teams app. Please go next, Victor. Yeah. So okay. So during this step, like I said previously, in order to successfully view the purchase order data fetching from the S4HANA system in the Microsoft Teams, the principal propagation has to be set up manually. I mean, the principal propagation between the SAP BTP and also the SAP S4HANA instance. So doing this first, the hands-on part of this mission, we were guiding you how to set up the principal propagation between the SAP S4HANA and the BTP inside of the cloud connector, which includes the detail step about, for example, like set up the BTP subaccount in the cloud connector, generating a system certificate, also generating a self-signed CA certificate in the cloud connector, and so on. So please kindly follow the instruction inside of the mission of this card to finish this step. Victor, we can go next. Okay, so after we finish the principal propagation between the SAP S4HANA and SAP BTP, now is the time to think about what kind of the screen that you would like your purchase order approver seeing in the Microsoft Teams. By using the Bridge framework, you could define and control your screen by writing the very simple configuration files. These configuration files are in the JSON format, which is shown inside of this slides, which could help you easily define how the data fetching from S4HANA could be rendering in the app displaying inside of the Microsoft Teams. All you need to do is to writing your own Bridge framework configuration files by looking into the help document we include inside of this mission, or you could simply download a predefined JSON configuration files for purchase order approval we included inside of this mission as well. After you finish this step, you are able to head into the next card. Okay, so now I would say we are able once you finish the Bridge framework configuration files, then we are able to think about create the service instance on the SAP BTP platform and also the Microsoft Azure platform. So let me think about it. So basically in our bridge framework, we provide you a tool called automation pipeline for SAP BTP and Azure service creation, and also for the bridge framework deployment purpose. If you still remember, we only set up the principal propagation between SAP S4HANA and BTP, but we neither mentioned the principal propagation between Microsoft Azure and BTP, nor mention about set up all the necessary service instance on the SAP BTP and Azure. So no worries about that. The bridge framework automation pipeline will help you on that. So during the development time, we found it would be really time consuming to set up the principal propagation between BTP and Azure manually. Also, it would be also time consuming to set up the service instance on BTP and Azure. So this is the reason why we came up this automation pipeline to reduce this effort. Basically, the automation pipeline is a predefined Docker image, which is shown inside of this slice. You can download from this mission. All you have to do is just to give your bridge framework configuration files you get from the previous step, and also follow the instruction inside of this card to give the information about your SAP BTP sub-account and also your Azure app registration information inside of the automation pipeline. Then you are able to run this Docker image as a container in your local environment. It will help you to create a service instance on the SAP BTP and also the Azure, also help you deploy your bridge framework source applications, and also it will help you to finish the principal propagation between Microsoft Azure and the BTP automatically for you. So Victor, we can go next. Yeah, thank you. So I would say after the automation pipeline execution successfully, so now we are able to configure the workflow for the purchase order approval in the S4HANA system. I would say in this mission, we are using the flexible workflow for purchase order to control the purchase order approval logic. Please follow the instruction in this card to finish the step in your own SAP S4HANA instance. Yeah, let's go next, Victor. Okay, so now if you guys still remember, the purchase order approver will receive the notification card after the purchase order created in your SAP S4HANA system. What behind the scenes is the ABAP job. There's a custom ABAP job running in your S4HANA instance that will be triggered automatically. This ABAP job will fetch in the purchase order data and also the workflow data, blending these two data into together, encapsulated into the message that's gonna send to the message queue in the event mesh service instance hosting on the SAP BTP platform. Basically, inside of doing this section, we came up instruction of guiding you to clone this predefined ABAP job from our GitHub repo to your SAP S4HANA instance. And also you can follow the instructions to activate it and scheduling your S4HANA instance directly. Yeah, Victor, let's go to the next. Okay, so now I would say after the bridge framework automation pipeline executed successfully, it will also generating a zip file which you can use to install it in your Microsoft Teams app to enable the bridge framework in your Microsoft Teams in order to do the purchase order approval. So please follow the instruction inside of this mission to install this zip file into your Microsoft Teams account. That the installation would be really easy just by one click. So after you install this zip file, everything will be done, and you are able to use this, and you are able to use the bridge framework to do the purchase order approval practice in your Microsoft Teams directly. Yeah, so now we have completed the mission, and we can testing the scenario by simply utilizing the custom Microsoft Teams app. So now I will hand over the screen back to my colleague Victor, and let's see how it works.
Yeah, thank you, Wei-kun. So yeah, let's take a look at how it works. So I think to allow time for questions, we'll jump to the middle of this demo to cover the most relevant portion here. But really we have some content here that also shows how configurations are achieved. So that was what Wei-kun was talking about earlier with regards to being able to specify the content and presentation of the content on your screen through these JSON configuration files. But here we'll show you an example of an app that's very similar to what will be created at the end of this mission. There might be some small differences here and there, but ultimately this is the type of approval app that you can create using Bridge Framework and by following this mission. So here we'll show you a demo in S4HANA using an on-premise S4HANA system. And this demo will show basically an approval workflow, how the notifications show up, and then some discuss functionality, which brings in that collaborative aspect. All right, so we'll start off by looking at this screen in S4HANA. We're looking at a purchase order ending in 1253, and this purchase order is awaiting approval. And because it meets certain requirements in our workflow, a notification is triggered by that ABAP job that Wei-kun was talking about earlier. So what that notification results in is an adaptive card being delivered to the person that's responsible for approving this notification. So if there are, for example, multiple people that might be responsible for approving this notification or approving this purchase order, then they'll all get a notification. So once the notification has been delivered to somebody's inbox, they're basically able to go ahead and take a look at it directly in Teams. And from here, you see this screen. Now, this screen is actually what's part of a custom Teams application. And so this screen, although it looks like it's part of Teams, right, thematically with the styling and everything and the look and feel of it, although it looks like it's part of Teams, it's actually being hosted on a BTP in a Cloud Foundry runtime. So this is where we were talking about earlier. You're going to be deploying things to Cloud Foundry, or really the automation pipeline is going to be deploying these applications to Cloud Foundry on your behalf. So here, looking at this screen, we can take a look at some of the details for this particular purchase order, and we can see whether we want to approve it or reject it. In this case, we take a look and see that there's actually something wrong with the supplier, but before rejecting it, we want to discuss it. So we hit discuss. Now, discuss actually put this purchase order as an adaptive card. So it happened a little quick, so it's hard to tell, but it put this purchase order as an adaptive card into a chat with the person that was responsible for creating it. So in this case, you can see that it's a chat with Wei-kun. So Wei-kun was the person that created this purchase order, and you might want to chat with him about it. So that's what that discuss button essentially does. So now from there, we're actually able to link back into S4 in case Wei-kun wants to make any actual modifications to the purchase order. Linking back into this purchase order, we might take a closer look and see whether there's actually any issues, but we don't have to, right? We could simply take action from within Teams. So as the person that's responsible for approving it, we'll message Wei-kun here and tell him that the supplier was not approved, so we're going to reject it. Then we can simply take a look at that purchase order again, open the task module for it, and reject it right from there. So again, these high traffic one-click use cases. And we see that the adaptive card has actually updated to reflect the rejection. And going back into S4, we can see that the rejection has processed and is reflected in the system. Then going back into Teams, in case you've received a lot of notifications and you still have some pending ones, you can also take a look at your inbox and see some of the pending tasks there. Now, this would be some extra functionality that's not necessarily a part of the mission, but it's also something that's possible with Bridge Framework here. So then taking a look at this purchase order, we'll take the action to approve it. Yeah. And with that action, that concludes our end result demo. So that was one use case, and that mission and the mission that we showcased today follows that use case. But there are other use cases as well. The use case that we showed falls into the category of an approval flow. So this enables somebody to basically use approval workflows in Teams directly. This could be for S4HANA, but it could also be for SuccessFactors or C4C. There's several examples of this. And we have some resources here with links on previous projects that have been done and what can be achieved with Bridge Framework. Then in the middle, we have some information and collaboration use cases. So here you might think about notifications that you want for actions being taken in SAP products. So this is really a really broad use case that could apply to many different things. Then you might also want to share and collaborate with visual summaries of business documents. So again, using those adaptive cards to communicate about business documents. You can think of sales orders or service orders or really any kind of business document that you want to share in Teams and then collaborate around it. Bridge Framework is something that could help you achieve that. And then lastly, we have these use cases where they leverage Teams data. So none of these use cases are mutually exclusive from one another. So you could basically take one use case and mold it with some other ones and kind of mix and match. But here we're looking at use cases that really take advantage of the data that's produced from Teams and doing things like exporting a Teams chat from Service Cloud, or maybe taking a look at summaries that are generated from meeting transcripts, and then bringing those back into Sales Cloud to basically empower decision making. So again, those two are examples of leveraging Teams data. All right, so with all that, like I mentioned at the very beginning when I was introducing our team, we are the strategic customer engagements team. So that means that we engage with customers directly. So what does that actually look like? Well, we follow an engagement model that often revolves around POCs, and we offer these POCs free of charge. What we'll do is we'll take a look at customers' requirements for a particular use case, such as this one, for approving purchase orders directly from Teams. We'll work with them to adapt it to their particular business challenges. This often happens through exploration workshops and similar engagements. And then we'll embark on a POC. That's a very collaborative experience with the customer. And this POC will usually, for a Teams integration use case, or something similar to what's presented here, could take 2 to 4 weeks. But our team also works on longer POCs that are more in the range of 8 to 12 weeks. And then we'll deliver that POC to the customer. And like I mentioned, it's free, but the main thing that we ask for in return is the ability to publish something publicly about what was done. So that might be in the form of a mission or a blog, or sometimes if a customer is really excited about what we did for them, it might come in the form of a testimonial or them speaking on stage at SAP events. All of those things are possibilities for us, but it's what enables us to essentially offer these POCs for free. So with that, thank you very much. I know we showed basically everything as a PowerPoint. We followed the exact mission format. So when you go ahead and take a look at the project board for the mission, those project cards will seem very familiar to you if you choose to embark on this mission. But thank you very much for joining us. And I think there will be some time for questions. Yeah, back to you, Gaurav.
Yep. Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Vaikun, for, showing us the whole use case. And thanks also for letting us know that, the demo can be exactly realized by following the mission. There are some questions in the Q&A part. So let me quickly start with the first one. I mean, I already gave my few cents to it, but yeah, I would also like to hear from you both. The first question is from Adi. What is the difference between this solution and SAP Duet, Mendo's, integration between SAP and SharePoint? So that was the first question that we had. Any ideas on that?
Yeah, so I think for that particular question, here the integration is very, very specific to Teams. So we focus on some of the features that are available in Teams things like adaptive cards, task modules, being able to take actions and from both adaptive cards and from task modules. Again, both of those things are very specific to Teams. I'm not exactly sure what might have been possible with Duet, but I would assume that very similar things might have been possible. So again, this is for customers that are really interested in Teams and achieving integrations there. There are also other solutions provided by SAP, things like Task Center, that can achieve more functionality, but they're not directly in Teams. So for customers that are looking at things that are looking at it for integrations that are directly in Teams and they want specifically to utilize Teams only, then this is a good way to go.
Great. Thanks, Victor. Moving to the next, would SAP Digital Access licensing apply for this scenario on the S4HANA side for documents created from Teams? That's the question.
So here around licensing, basically Bridge Framework and the functionality that's offered as a result of Bridge Framework is open source. So there's no licensing for Bridge Framework. That being said, Bridge Framework does use a fair amount of BTP services to achieve its functionality. So for those BTP services, right, your existing contracts and your existing utilization agreements, et cetera, would apply. So that's really how that's handled. As for business documents that are created as a result of using Teams, that is a good question. I don't think there's any additional licensing that we add on our side from that. So really that might incur some cost on the team side with regards to using services there. But I'm not aware of anything on the SAP side with additional licensing for those kind of documents.
Great. Then the next question is, could you explain a little bit more about the user authentication? Are you using a business user from S4 or a system technical user that has the authentication or authorization from the communication system configured in S4?
Yeah, Wei Kun, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So I would say we are using the business user, which is the real users. I mean, which is the user for the real human users using the SAP S4HANA system. So here's how the authentication flow works. So once the user log into the Microsoft Teams for any actions they performed inside of the Microsoft Teams app, in the request header, we can capture a Microsoft Teams auth token. So basically, we will exchange this Teams auth token with the AD to exchange for a symbol assertion. Then we basically use this symbol assertion to exchange a BTP access token. Instead of this BTP access token or the symbol assertion, it will also contain the user's, I would say, the user's credential or the user's identity. For example, your user email. So after we have this BTP access token, then we will forward this BTP access token to the cloud connector and also forward this. Eventually, this BTP access token will be reach out to the S4HANA side. So inside of the S4HANA, we have to configure the rule-based certifications based on checking the user's email inside of the token that passing from the BTP to the S4. If the user email is from the token is matched with a user email inside of the S4HANA system, then we are able to actually to I would say to consume the OData service and only fetch the data related to this user via the OData API call and return this response back to the user, displaying it into the Microsoft Teams. This is how the entire authentication workflow works, I would say.
Yep. Thanks, Wei Kun, for explaining that part.
Yeah, no problem.
The next question is, there are a lot of components involved. If there is an issue in the whole communication workflow, would one see this on a central place or does one need to monitor each component? Good question, I would say.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of components involved here. My response to this would be essentially that everything is routed through the backend application that we have. So generally, Anything that could go wrong will be captured in that backend application's logs, which you can see on BTP. However, there are circumstances in which something might go wrong on the team side. We don't have a whole lot of visibility into that. There is some, but for these extension applications, it's a little bit walled off. But again, we would probably see any issues in the backend app. And then again, any kind of front end issues would likely also be seen in the backend. So in some form of communication happening there. That being said, there is not, apart from the backend, which routes pretty much all of these calls, there is not another centralized place. So that would be the place to look.
Great. Thanks, Victor. Next one, is it possible to define a limit for the open items on the vendor level against which is checked in the operative purchase orders? And if this limit is reached, is a message processed? That's the question.
So my interpretation of what this question is asking is something along the lines of maybe something that would be handled in the workflow. So say if there's a limit for open items on a vendor level, okay, so if you're able to configure this in the workflow, then in all likelihood, you would be able to take some action based on it in Teams. So what I can imagine is something like a notification being delivered in that sense, if that's what you mean by a message being processed. I'm not sure if I'm getting it completely correct, but Wei Kun, do you see anything else to this question?
No, not really. I would say because based on my knowledge on the SAP workflow in the SAP S4HANA, the flexible workflow can only let you define what is the scenario that you need to perform the purchase order approval. For example, if the net amount is larger than a specific number, then the workflow will be triggered, or it can be where the purchase order has some special items or some material groups used in the purchase order, then this kind of the scenario can be defined in the flexible workflow. But for the scenario published in the question, I would say seems like some configuration need to be done in the S4HANA system directly. And actually we cannot doing it in the bridge framework currently, I would say.
Yeah. Also, maybe if there is something more to the questions, and can you please, use the chat to elaborate your question so that our experts can answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we can't answer it here and we need more details, please feel free to email us. Our emails are right here on the slide. So yeah, we'd be happy to answer it if we can kind of get more of an understanding about the scenario.
Great. Then there was this question on what all things can be leveraged on trial. So of course there are services which are available on trial as well that you can leverage, but specifically for this scenario, Victor, can you also highlight if this can be achieved on trial version or licensing part?
Yeah, so everything apart from event mesh that's shown in this mission is available on trial. So basically, if my memory serves me correctly, we've published two separate automation pipelines. So one of the images is for trial accounts and one of them is for standard accounts. So for the trial account, you'll obviously want to use the automation pipeline container that corresponds to trial accounts. And the only difference there will be that event mesh won't be added as part of it. So some of the functionality around event mesh, like delivering notifications, might not be present, but you can still essentially have most of the functionality there. You'll simply have to access it from Teams, so you won't necessarily see those adaptive cards being delivered. But you'll still be able to open the application in Teams and then go to, a purchase order, take a look at it, and take action on it from there.
Great. Thanks. There was this another comment or question, any link explaining how to publish message from SAP S4 or ECC to event mesh. So yeah, I mean, this is one such use case, but we do also have other missions on Discovery Center, which highlights this part where you can publish message from S4 or ECC to event mesh. Feel free to explore the use cases on Discovery Center.
Yeah, correct.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I think there are no further questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, but still we have a couple of minutes. Maybe if the participants you come across more questions or can think of more questions, feel free to post them in the chat. If take a couple of minutes to talk about how you can land up to Discovery Center or how you can start your use case if you're exploring to leverage some other missions, or let's say if you are a partner who wants to contribute missions to Discovery Center, what would be the best step to do so? So I hope you can see my browser screen. Just like you could choose any browser of your choice and just search for SAP Discovery Center. This should give you the first link to the Discovery Center landing page, and then you could start or leveraging the use cases that was shown in this session. But not just this, you can also start other missions as well. So that is something I would motivate you to start the mission. So this is what the page looks like, and here we have two main facets: missions and the services. So services are pretty much standard. You could explore all the BTP services that are currently available for you, but also the mission catalog where you can explore all other use cases. Yeah, and we pick the use cases for Garage from here itself. So that is something you can explore. And also, if you're a partner who wants to contribute missions on Discovery Center, feel free to reach out to us, and then we can help you to contribute missions on Discovery Center as well. For every specific use case, we do also have pricing tagged along for the mission as well. So let's say if you are a customer or a partner who wants to start a Fury application development, you could also see how the pricing would look like under this view estimate, and the whole architecture diagram in front of you. So that also becomes an easy way to take those next steps towards adopting cloud. Yeah, so feel free to leverage Discovery Center. It's free of cost, and there is no charge to start the missions on Discovery Center. Yeah. Great. With that, we also host some other sessions on a monthly basis. So that's the monthly cadence that you would see. We also have SAP Screen Personas, we have Fury Practitioners Forum, we have BTP Practitioners Forum, so on and so forth. So feel free to leverage these sessions as well, and learn from them as well. Those are some of the live events and some other virtual events that we are hosting around the course of the year. So yeah, if you are pretty much interested, you can take a note of these sessions and register yourselves for attending these sessions. For the session today, we would also be doing a repeat session later for the Americas and EMEA's friendly time zone. So if you were not able to attend the session or joined late, or if there are your colleagues who would also be interested in joining the session, please share the session links with them. And yeah, we would be showcasing the same session again later today. Feel free to attend that part as well. I guess we are already over time. Let's see if we have some more questions or not. Okay, I don't see there are further questions. So with that, I would really like to thank all the participants who joined in and stayed till the very end. Also, thanks to Victor and Vaikund, explaining the use case and showcasing the potential of BTP. With that, I would like to thank everyone and wish you a good time ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.